Hello and a very warm welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with me. I'm your host. I'm Rosie Moss. Now, those of you who have been with me since the beginning, or at least kind of earlier on, you may remember chatty episodes. Now, these were an opportunity for first off me and Lulu, then me and John, and then sometimes me on my own to kind of talk about what's going on in the day-to-day world. And I thought it'd be really fun to bring these back. So I asked my good friend and fellow widow and author, which we're definitely going to talk about, Emma Charlesworth, to come on. She graciously accepted, and here she is today. So welcome back, Emma.
Thank you, Rosie. It's lovely to be back.
And we were just trying to work out when you came on, and we reckon it was August 2023. So that's actually over 2 years. It doesn't feel like years since we spoke.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. But I'm sure it was
each other in real life.
We have, in the real life world.
In IRL, we did.
Yes.
We came to each other's festivals, didn't we? A little bit of cross-pollination widow support. Very nice. So, Emma, I think do you want to give a little kind of whistle-stop tour of what brought you on to the first time you came on the podcast? And everybody else, you can go and find it. I can't remember the episode. I'm so disorganised. Do you know what it is? It's because we're recording in the evening. All brain cells have left my body. This would be carnage.
81, 82 maybe.
I'm going to look it up in a minute and I'll say at the end. So you can easily find it. You can just go on to wherever you get your podcast and you can search for Emma Charlesworth and she'll pop up. And Emma was, I think, possibly even my first guest to come on and talk about COVID. You were certainly very early on. And I don't want to tell your story for you, Emma, but just give us a little whistle-stop tour if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the story that people heard about on the news, if you like. So my late husband walked down the stairs to the ambulance, got into an ambulance, was taken off to intensive care and never came home. So those stories that you heard on the news, we were one of those stories. He was then in intensive care for 3 weeks, during which time we weren't allowed to see him. And when I say we, I'm talking about me and our daughter, Rebecca. So she was 10 years old at the time. She turned 10 in the January and all this happened. He went into ICU in the March and he died 3 weeks later in the April. He went into ICU on my birthday. So that's a bit of that's tough to get your head around because every year I now get older is a reminder that he went to ICU on that day. So that's a bit of a head fuck, if you like. But yeah, so he was in ICU for 3 weeks and it was the most surreal of times because no one came in. No one came. So he went to ICU in the middle of the night.
Was he Maidstone?
He was Medway. It's a Medway Maritime Hospital he went to. So it was very, like I say, nobody came in. So he went to ICU and that was it. It was just me and Rebecca on our own. And that was it. And that was how we were for 3 weeks. Because it was COVID, it was lockdown. It was so early on, like this was March 2020. He developed his temperature the day before the UK was put into its first lockdown. So early on that we didn't even know anything about it. You know, you couldn't even get a COVID test at home back then. You could only be tested once you were in hospital. So we don't actually know if Rebecca and I had it at that point. We weren't ill, but doesn't mean we weren't asymptomatic. And that was it. We were on our own. It became Rebecca and I almost against the world. And so I made a very conscious decision that I was going to tell our story on social media. Partly because I wanted to let the world know that this wasn't just happening this was happening to real life people. And there was a lot on the news and it was all numbers. And if you remember back in those very early stages, it was so many people are in hospital today, so many people have died today. But every one of those people was a person with family, with friends, with colleagues. And I felt personally that the media became too fixated on numbers and not people. So that was one reason I made the conscious decision to tell our story. But the other reason was it was the only way I could get support was virtually, whether that be somebody sending me a lovely message on social media, whether that was somebody sending me a text message, somebody picking up the phone. No one was coming, and I can't stress this enough, no one came into my house. No one hugged me for 3 months after he died, other than my daughter.
Oh, Emma,
because no one was allowed to. So virtual support was all I could get. And so it was a combination of wanting to tell the real story of COVID, which will bring us on nicely to where I've gone to next. But I wanted to tell that story, but it was the only way. And when you're feeling so low and somebody sends you a message and is like, how has today been? You can pour that out in a way that you can't do when you're just sat at home. And I had lovely colleagues would message, I would have friends, and that virtual support. So that was one of the reasons I told my story right from the very off.
I can relate to some of this actually, because as you know yourself, John was in ICU at the same time. Yes. My second husband, it wasn't my husband at the time, and the timeline is almost identically parallel. And although his story was different, and he did come home, I do remember that isolation, that terror. I'm at home with the children. I had my children and his daughter, and you're trying to keep everybody updated. And like you, I found so much solace and comfort in social media, in WhatsApp messages, in my friends, in my phone, and people they were willing us on from across the world. And I think up until that point, I'd perhaps been a bit, social media, but I really saw that when used for good, how it can bring people together. And it's the closest thing we could have in that time.
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, I was at a work event recently, and the topic of social media came up. And, I think the world's probably gone a bit crazy since COVID, and social media, I think, has changed. There's lots of pros and cons in a way. And this person I was speaking to was against social media, and I completely take that on board. But I was like, okay, can I give you a different perspective? So can I tell you about what happened to me 5 years ago? I've never met this person before. I said, can I tell you what happened to me 5.5 years ago? I did grief drop because I had inadvertently, earlier in the conversation, referred to my late husband without even consciously thinking about it, because I'm 5.5 years in now, and it is part of my life. I'm living with it on a day-to-day basis. And so I referred to Charlie as my late husband. So I just did this. I just did it. And this person, when I then started talking about it, and they said, I had picked up on that, but I wasn't going to press you unless the conversation went that way, which I thought was really respectful, actually. They're not going to push me for details, and they're not going to be like a grief tourist trying to work out what's happened, if you like. So that was, and they, we had this conversation. I said about the virtual support I received. I can still remember so I was told to prepare for Charlie to never come home the week before he died. And at that point, it was the most surreal thing that I think anyone had ever done. But from a support perspective, and I'm gonna name drop him, because one day I'm gonna marry him when I grow up. But I've said that about Jason Donovan since I was 7 years old, and people will have heard about this on the first podcast. But his fan page got me a message from Jason Donovan on Twitter, just sending support and strength. And it was those little glimmers that it probably took him 30 seconds, right, to put a little tweet and follow me on Twitter and send that out.
That's all it takes.
But in that moment,
like that, right?
In that moment, when I was isolated at home, trying to be a mum to my 10-year-old, trying to help her understand what the hell was happening in the world, that her daddy was in hospital, that little sending you all my love and strength and thinking of your hubby, I can't actually remember the exact words, it just meant so much. And so that's what I mean about that virtual support. It Emma, probably got me through.
Was it almost worth your husband dying to get a note from Jason Donovan?
Oh, I couldn't possibly say that.
Almost, but not quite.
Almost, but not quite.
Was I just?
But you know what? I think this is something that we have to do in this situation, is you look for the positives and you develop the darkest sense of humor to get you through.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember early on when I was sending messages going, oh, this is, I wouldn't have been that bad in lockdown. You didn't have to go into bloody hospital to escape from me. And, when the paramedics, because it was very surreal, I had 3 paramedics in the house, all suited and booted like something out of ET, in the white suits and the masks and everything. And I was joking, and I was like, this is the most elaborate way out of getting me a birthday card and a present that I've ever seen. and I can't even think when it was. It probably was after we spoke, so I know I wouldn't have used this word on the previous podcast, but I've been introduced to the word levity, right? And Levity. And if ever there is a word to describe me and my humor, it is that word. It's like my favorite word. And anyone who reads my blogs will notice that it's peppered throughout. But it's about how you find humor in a dark situation, and you use humor.
I like that.
And so, yeah, that's my new favorite word, because it sums up what I've done.
And words are important to you, aren't they? That's how you've expressed a lot of your grief. It's how you've shared your journey as blogs, and it's words. So
yes,
the kind of natural progression of that, Emma, would be to write a book, which you have. Congratulations. You must feel incredibly proud. And I believe you're going to show me a copy, are you?
I can hold one up. Copy. This got delivered today. It's a real life book. It's actually quite...
How does it feel to hold that in your hand, knowing that you wrote that?
It's incredibly surreal.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's really hit me yet that this is my book. And I don't know if that's going to sound silly, but you see this and, there's my name, there's Emma Charlesworth. I know I wrote this book, but I think there's a part of me that can't quite make that association. When I was looking at the pre-order link on Amazon and I'm reading the bio, and I'm reading, okay, that's actually me. Like, that's actually me. And
you did that.
I did that. And I, it's when I think back to that virtual support and how my writing has kind of evolved. So I didn't write before Charlie died. So to the point, I didn't write. I would always make Charlie write in birthday cards, Christmas cards, sympathy cards, you name it, because I said he had a better way with words than I did. So I didn't write before Charlie died. And the irony is that I went to university to study journalism. I wanted to be a journalist when I was younger.
Me too, Emma.
But I dropped out after 3 months because I felt it wasn't right for me. So why that is so ironic now is that I'm a writer. I'm not a journalist, but I am a writer. I have subsequently written articles that have appeared in magazines, that have appeared in the Metro, for example. And I have been asked on more than one occasion, are you a journalist? No. But there's this huge sense of irony. And I can remember it was the month after Charlie died when I did one of my long, wieldy Facebook posts. And the bassist who was in Charlie's band at the time, because Charlie was a singer, and he said, have you thought about writing a blog? Sorry, what? What do you mean, have I thought about writing a blog? And he said, I just think your words might provide light to someone who is struggling, or words to that effect. But he was basically saying, I think your words might prove helpful, because I can remember that post. It was the month after Charlie had died. We'd gone up to Medway Hospital to take some toiletries and some things that people had gathered. And I'd had a conversation with Rebecca that day, and I'd told her that this wasn't going to define us. We weren't going to be defined by what had happened to us. And so that was how I ended the post. Our lives have been irrevocably changed forever, but this is not going to define who we are. And that was a month after Charlie died. And this whole blog thing whirled around in my head for a while. And then the blog got launched the following year, which was 2021. And then the blog kind of snowballed. But again, I didn't, and in the same way, I've not necessarily written the book for people to read it, which might sound stupid. I've not written a book to be read, but the blog, I started writing because it was very cathartic for me to write. It was a way of getting thoughts out of my head and invariably I was writing blogs before I went to bed because it stopped those thoughts being in my head and I could get them out.
Emptying the brain.
But then they started resonating with people. And, I would get messages saying, I don't know if you need to hear this today, but you've helped a stranger. And all of a sudden, I just couldn't quite, again, I couldn't quite process how my random thoughts, musings, ramblings, whatever you want to call them, that I was somehow getting down onto a page, were helping strangers and making people feel heard and understood. And that became, not only was that incredibly powerful, it also became really humbling, because I was like, I don't understand how my random thoughts are doing this and helping people. And then the following year, in 2022, I was nominated for the Helen Bailey Best Blog Award through the charity Widowed and Young, which I'd become an ambassador for. So for those people who might not have heard of it, Widowed and Young is a charity for people who have been widowed before their 51st birthday, not 21st, 51st birthday. So I'd become an ambassador. I got nominated for this blog. And that in itself, I can remember getting that email and crying, because I just didn't understand how little old me, had been nominated. And I didn't win. I lost out to a very, very worthy winner. And then the following, so I carried on writing, and then the following year I was nominated for that Helen Bailey Award again in 2023. And that year I did win it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But that again, I sat there looking at this trophy, slightly bemused, because it was just, and that for me was really special, because these aren't people that have to read it. My family and my friends read it, and my family and my friends tell me that I can write, but this was essentially strangers, right? These are people who don't necessarily know me, and they had taken the time to say nice things. They don't have to say nice things about me. They're not my mum. And so that was incredibly humbling. And then the whole, you thought about writing a book, started being bandied around. And it was there at the back of my mind. I would be lying to say that book wasn't at the back of my mind. And then my work's Christmas meeting in 2023, we went around the room and people said what they were going to achieve in 2024. And I sat in that meeting and said, I'm going to write a book.
Good for you.
That's what I said I was going to achieve in 2024.
You say it out loud, and then you feel like that's something I'm going to do now. Yeah. It's not I'm going to try, it's I'm going to do it.
Yeah. So that's what I sat there and I said, I'm going to write a book. And then I just thought, am I actually going to write a book? I work full time. I solo parent. I'm a dance mum. Am I actually going to write this book? So I started. And here we are now in November 2025 with the physical hard copy of it.
And the book is available to pre-order now, is it? Or can you actually order the book now?
It's available for pre-order. Obviously, people picking this up in a few weeks, months, whenever, it will be available to order. But yes, it's available now. It's on Amazon. I've learned a lot about the process of writing a book through this. It got bizarrely picked up in the US before it got picked up in the UK. So, Barnes and Noble were the first people to pick it up. Then Walmart picked it up. And now it's on Amazon, and other retailers will start to come on board. But that's part of this process that I didn't know anything about. I've never written a book before.
And we've spoken, haven't we? Because we've both written a book, and without knowing the other one was, and different books. We're not in direct competition, don't worry. You can buy both, people. But I had an issue with my publisher. My publisher went into liquidation. So all this work I put in, all this effort, all this money, let's be honest, and suddenly there was nothing happening. So I've now been speaking to your publisher, and we'll probably sign with them. And it is a process. A process. I've always wanted to write a book. I hold my hands ever since I was a little girl. I used to write little tiny books, and I did a degree in journalism, wanting to write, and I just lacked the confidence. I just lacked that confidence to push myself forward. And I think if like you, it's been incredibly cathartic, quite painful. And there were a couple of things I wanted to ask you about your own book. And the title is Daddy Going to Be Okay? And that's a direct quote from Rebecca, right?
Yeah. So Rebecca said that to me.
How did she feel seeing
that? I think it's a bit surreal, to be honest. And so that was what she said to me. So as I mentioned, Charlie walked down the stairs to the ambulance. He got into the ambulance and then he was gone. And interesting. And we walked up the stairs. This all happened at like 3:30, 4:30 in the morning, right? So we came back upstairs after he had gone in the ambulance, and she looked at me, and they were the words she said to me. She said, "Is Daddy going to be okay?" And
ouch.
That, considering I'd had lack of sleep, I don't know where I pulled it from, but I said to her, I don't know. Because something in my brain said, don't lie to this child.
Don't lie.
Don't lie. So I told her that I didn't know.
And what we do, that's your gut instinct, is to say to her, of course he'll be okay, you know, don't worry. And actually the damage that you could have done then, not unwillingly, of course.
Yeah. And so I told her that the doctors and the nurses would do everything they could to make Daddy be okay, but I couldn't promise her that he would be, or words to that effect. And so when the book, interesting enough, when it first went to my publishers, that was not the title of the book. And this is what I mean about the process and the evolution of a book.
What was it?
It was originally To Charlie, because that was the last words I said at the speech I gave at his memorial service. I asked everybody to raise a toast and raise a glass to Charlie. And that's what I wanted to call the book. So that's what it originally started life as. But the more I kind of went back and I did some editing, and then I worked, and I just went, it sounds like a letter.
I keep editing mine.
Oh, it's dreadful. You reach a point where you're just like, no, I cannot do this anymore. But it sounded more like I was,
who is a journalist.
Yeah, it sounded like I was writing a letter to Charlie, and that's not what this book is. This is not a letter to Charlie, and I worried that the connotation would be misconstrued. And then I also felt it was important to pick up on the fact that this is also Rebecca's story. This tells what it's like for her. And so changing that title brings her in from the off. And it's very clear that there was a child involved in this story. And Charlie, it comes back to that point I made. He wasn't a number. He was a daddy. He wasn't just a husband.
Yeah.
He wasn't a number. He was a 10-year-old little girl's daddy. And so she did not know that that's what I'd called the book. So I didn't tell her because, so to your point about how does she feel, I didn't want her putting me off, if you like.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't want her saying, oh, that's a bit rubbish, as, 15-year-old teenagers can be like.
No greater cricket.
Yeah, she's the world's worst critic. But, or should that be the world's best critic? I don't know. But I just didn't tell her. So it was only after it had gone, and in my head I was like, this is what the title is. This is what I'm going to call it. And once the cover had been designed, that's when she found out. And I think there's a little bit of an eye roll moment about her, about that. That's where I went with. I think she's like, sob story, and I think there's a little bit of her.
Stop milking me, Mum.
Yeah, almost. But I think it's very surreal for her as well that I've written this book, and it's something that I'm incredibly conscious of, is that this is my story, and this is my take on what happened to us and how it was from my point of view. And obviously Charlie had so many friends, family, colleagues, everyone will have their different memories of what that was like when Charlie was in hospital, but this is what it was like for her and I. And I think, it's a bit surreal, but when I showed her the Amazon link, she did sit there in the car and she went, this is pretty cool. And I think, as praise from a teenager can go, the fact that I don't think she was saying that I was cool. Let's not be too bold here.
Oh, I heard it as you were cool, Emma.
Yeah.
Oh, I heard it.
But I think the fact that I've done this and it's now available is, to her, is pretty cool.
Because we're just mum, right? We feed them, we clothe them, we drive them to dance competitions, we do all that. And I think for them to see that we are human beings outside of this, and that we can create something that's awesome, and that will be in the British, like I said this earlier, be in the British Library forever. That gives me such a buzz.
Yeah,
such a buzz.
Yeah.
So has she read it?
No. And
no,
I don't. I think she will read it one day. I don't know when that day will be.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that with my kids, because there's some stuff in there that's quite dark. You know, it's about the places I went to,
Yeah.
and you've got some of that in there as well. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's quite heavy, especially 15. You know, they think they're grown up, but they're still babies, aren't they?
Yes. And you know, there's things in there, and I put in messages, and you know, I can remember. So I changed my phone after Charlie died, and I went from Android to Apple, which meant I lost all of the messages that were on the WhatsApp. So I would, I'd set up group chats when Charlie was in hospital. So when I was writing, and I did a lot of writing on my commute, and I would then work out, I was at a particular point in my story, and I would message my sister, and I would say, can you send me WhatsApp messages from the group on this day? I need to know what I was saying. And my sister would always come back, and she was like, where are you? What mood are you in? And are you doing this right now? Because she would go back and read it and just think, if you're sat on a train, no, you're not having this now. So my sister was very measured in when she would send me these messages. But that in itself, so there are direct messages that are in there, and I think that for Rebecca, she won't know any of that, and that's going to be incredibly hard, and that's what I've got at the back of my mind. I am now officially, scarily, a published author, but I'm also a mum, and you know, we've got to get a balance here, and it's going to bring it back up. And you know, one of my biggest fears in releasing this is I just don't want people trying to put us back there, because we're not there anymore. We are not in 2020, 2021, when we could barely get up off the floor, you know, when grief was just all consuming. We've grown around that grief, and it's part of us, and it's never ever going away, but we're not where we were in 2020 and 2021 when this book is set.
And that's probably why you're in a place where you can go back and talk about it, where you can publish this book talking about it, because back then, you know, it would have been a very different book, and B, you know, who would have been able to sit at a computer and type like that? So you have to, I think, have some distance from the trauma often to be able to put it into words. And I get it, this idea of the children reading it. I mean, my book is different, because it's sort of like a guide almost. So there's a chapter on Widow's Fire, and you know, yes, of course I had Widow's Fire, of course I did some fucking stupid things. Do I want my teenage boys reading about it? No. So thankfully I have plenty of other people's stories that I could use, and you just have to, I always think, would I want my children and my mum to read what's in this book? And I think, if, as long as you are honest and you are brave and you are true, then there's nothing in there that can shock or horrify people. You know, there'll be quite a lot of sadness in there, but I just think we talk a lot about legacy, and to have your story, you know, committed to history forever. What a great gift! What a great gift to give the world. And of course, the statistics of COVID were, as we know, shocking. And this idea that every single person, you know, they will have a story as well. And I'm thinking about the people that will read your book and be able to relate to it, because you weren't the only one. Tragically, you weren't. And it's that gift of having some degree of a mouthpiece and a platform, but also a gift for writing, which you clearly do.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think it's interesting. And I also, there's part of me that I think she, and I don't want to be putting words in her mouth, but I think there's also part of her that will, when she does eventually read that, be that in 5 years, 10 years, whenever, she will realize quite what it was like for me. And this is a conversation that her and I have on a regular basis, is that I will never tell her I understand what it's like for her, because I can't, because I didn't lose my dad at the age of 10 in a global pandemic when the world was shut down. I'm not growing up without my dad. She is. But equally, and I will say this to her, I'm like, but you don't understand what it was like for me to lose my husband. And whilst her and I are grieving the same person, it's a different relationship. And so I think there's going to be part of her, when she does read it, that it's going to open her eyes actually to how much I protected her from in those early days, as well as what it's like to get out of bed every day and do this, and this solo parenting, which is, no one preps you for it. You know what it's like, right? You know just how hard. And I will not use the word single parent. I am a solo parent. It's me. The buck stops with me. and I think it's going to open her eyes a little bit. And I think, you know, I worry for friends and family, I think, because in a way they were probably shielded a lot from, because they weren't in the house, and you could tell if I was having a bad day from a phone call, maybe, or from a tone of a text message. And, you know, like I said, when my sister would send me some of these messages, I would look at them and just go, Christ, you can tell that I'd lost everything. I had no fight left in me. But they weren't physically seeing me. And so I think some of the things I talk about, you know, it's going to be incredibly hard for friends and family to realize that I was doing this on my own, and it's not because they couldn't help me, it's because there was no choice in the matter. I had to keep going.
Yeah, and it's even without the added, you know, complication of the pandemic, it is very lonely being a widow. It is.
Yes.
And you talking about people not being able to physically see you, but I think often, even if they physically see us, we wear our very good widow mask, and even being able to function and send text messages and write eloquently crafted Facebook posts and things like that. Even if you're sharing your pain and your trauma, even the fact that you've written quite articulately indicates to people that you're okay. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know whether the answer is that we kind of rip off our cloaks and, you know, run naked down the streets. I might be up for that, actually, if you are. Or if it's just about creating, don't, because I will. And it's about that kind of creating that greater understanding and compassion. You know, this is actually what it's like being widowed. It's not, you know, you don't wear a veil to the funeral, have lots and lots of meals and support, and then, you know, you wake up and you're okay again. That it doesn't work like that. And I think what we are doing in this kind of widowed world is sharing what it actually is like: the isolation, the loneliness, the fear, the financial, you know, desperation. You know, when Ben died, I had 50 quid in my bank and all his accounts locked. You were not all handed life insurance and a mortgage paid off, and it doesn't work like that. And I think people also need to understand that actually, you know, we're not in the same place as we were when our husbands died, but we're also not fixed. And sometimes it is still going to be messy. That said, I did have to say to my eldest, because I'm trying to get better at Instagram. I've got nearly 1 million views this week. I don't know what you do with that, but and I said to him, you must be careful, because things that you're seeing me post on my work page, they are true feelings and they are real and they're authentic, because it wouldn't work if they weren't. But I'm not constantly feeling that, and you need to be aware of that, because I thought, oh God, he's going to look at this and think, Mum's having a breakdown. What can I do? And of course, it's explaining to them that you're not living in that all the time, because you couldn't. But I think it's important that we share what it does feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're not rambling at all. You are making complete and utter sense. And I think that's it. Is that, you know, so I was widowed at 39. You know, I'm like you. I didn't wear a veil to the funeral. I'm not Queen Victoria. I'm not.
Wish you had. I wish I had.
Yeah. Well, no one would have seen, because I only had 12 people there, so no one would have really seen me. So it would have been waiting. Maybe I should do it now. But
why not? Book launch.
You know, it's I'll rock up with a black veil to the book launch. That could be inspired. But it's that, isn't it? It's. I tell my story and we talk about it, but I look back and I'm like, would I have known what to say to me if this had happened to someone I worked with? Would I, if it had been a friend of mine, would I have known what they were going through and what it was like? And the answer is no. Would I have done the platitudes and what's expected, for want of a better word, when someone dies? Yes, I would have sent flowers. Since Charlie died, I no longer send flowers when people die, because flowers bloody die too. They die, and they make more bloody work for you. You know, at the time, I think I didn't even have vases. I was borrowing vases from neighbours. We ended up with like 15 vases, and I was so grateful, and the smell was beautiful. But I vividly remember one day standing on my driveway with my mum and my stepdad, you know, 2 meters away from me on the driveway, and ranting at them about I don't know what, and then sorting out all the flowers. So I had all the vases lined up, and then the wind came and it blew a vase over and the vase smashed, and then I started ranting about that, and I'm like, so now I no longer send flowers. But what's really interesting, and I wrote a blog about that, and the blog was called When the Flowers Stop, because someone I worked with, her mum had said she will need support when the flowers stop, not now. That's when she's going to need the support.
When the flowers stop.
wrote a blog called When the Flowers Stop, and that was it. And so, but when I put this and I explained about, actually people are very good in those early days, and then it filters off because people go back to their lives, as they should, you know. I'm not saying people should have been like 24/7, but people have said to me, we'd never thought that about flowers, you've made us think differently. And actually, if I can do that and make people think with my words, and, you know, as I said, I didn't necessarily write the book to be read. It was a way of articulating what we had gone through, and it's a legacy for Charlie and Rebecca. And of course, if people read it, and of course, if it resonates and it helps one person, that's incredible. But for me, it's that being able to put down, this is what it was like. This is what it's like as a widow, when you cannot physically get up off the floor, when, you know, that pain is so great. But there's also, you do keep going somehow, even when you don't think you can. You do keep going somehow, and that, for me, like I say, if it just gives a little bit of hope, then that can only be a positive at some point.
And hope is in really short supply when you're widowed, isn't it? Really, really short supply. You feel hopeless. And you literally feel hopeless. You think, I'm going to be, I will survive this because I have to, because you know, if you've got children, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I've got to do this. But you anticipate of quite a joyless existence, you know, that you're just going to exist. And I think, and somebody commented on an Instagram thing I shared the other day, and she said, you know, it's never going to get better. And I can remember this. And when people said to me, it will get better, and you'd say, fuck off, it won't get better. How is this going to get better? I'm just going to be further away from him. This won't get better. And I think it's something comforting in hearing from somebody who has walked the same path. And I can look you in the eye and say, I thought things would never get better. And they did, and they are. And I'm not saying that I'm not sad a little bit every day, because there's always at least one moment in every day. But I wish I had known back then. I wish I'd known that life would keep going, and it would keep going in a positive way. There'd be, you know, that I'm going through a divorce. There's been some, you know, pretty shitty bits in the last 7 years, but there's also been enormous joy and happiness. And I have 3 children who I'm very proud of. I have a career I love. And I think it's understanding that joy doesn't replace the sadness, that it doesn't mean that if you're experiencing joy and happiness that you're kind of shoving your grief out of the way. And I just think it's so important that people know that it's okay and that it will come.
Yeah, and hope. So hope is such an important word. So if you, that's Charlie's handwriting.
Is it a tattoo?
So that's my tattoo, Charlie's handwriting.
So how did you get that? When did he write the word hope?
So he wrote the word hope in it was a birthday card that actually, this was not sent to me. This was he sent this to someone else, and I got them to look and see whether he'd written hope you have a good day or something. So that was taken from that card. So I got a photo of it, and I took it to the tattoo artist, and they got it tattooed. So hope is really important to us. It was my nan's maiden name. It's my daughter's middle name. And part of the reason that Rebecca's got that middle name is because it was my nan's maiden name, but also because Charlie had also had cancer. So he'd lived through cancer and survived that, and then COVID got him. But so we didn't know if we were going to be able to have children, but he never gave up hope that he was going to be a father. And so hope's an incredibly powerful word to us. And so again, in trying to make sure he is as much a part of my writing, because this is the biggest challenge, if you like, is that I've written my blog's won an award, I've written a book, you know, I've become a published author, but my husband has died for that to have happened.
Oh,
you know,
yeah, I know.
It's like when you won your award, which is I'm so thrilled for you that you won that award. But you only started this because your husband died. And that is a real, you have to weigh that up. So I want Charlie to be as much part of this story as I want Rebecca to be a part of this story. So when you release a book and you self-publish, which is what I've done, you can release under an imprint name. So my imprint name for my publishing company is Twists of Hope Publishing, because it brings in the hope from Rebecca, from Charlie, And the logo, so my blog is called Life is a Roller Coaster, which has got a roller coaster logo. So my amazing friend who designed the book cover for me and did all my logos for my blog pages, we have used the same roller coaster with Charlie's handwriting on the hope. So that's become the logo for my publishing company, Twists of Hope Publishing.
I love that.
So
Do you know, interesting. Sorry, or talked over you then. I was just going to quickly say to you, Ben's sister struggled to conceive, and at the point of Ben dying, she was pregnant with their first child, and she's called Hope, because she felt that we all needed some hope in our lives. So I think that's a really lovely thing.
Yeah, and I think hope's really important. And, you know, to your point, you know, I remember really early on saying to a friend of mine, can you just fast forward me to when this grief stops?
Yeah.
And my friend looked at me and she said, when is that exactly? When am I fast forwarding you to? And I was like, I don't know, but I cannot take this pain anymore. It's too hard. I physically can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. This is too hard for me. Fast forward me to the end. And I think as you move on, and, you know, I'm 6 years next April, I am still grieving, and I am always going to be grieving, you know, but I live with that grief now. It is part of my grief. And
constant
so
companion.
It's a constant. And I saw, you know, I'm an author, so I'm going to pick on this analogy, but I saw this brilliant photo analogy of grief recently, which was an empty bookshelf bar one book that said grief. That was it. And then so it was the start of I can't think what it was termed, whether it was the start of the grief journey or whatever. But then the next picture next to it is my life now. And that book is still on that bookshelf with the same size, but around it are plants, there's ornaments, there's other books, and that's it. My grief is part of it. And so I wrote a blog, as I mentioned, you know, Charlie went into ICU on my birthday. And so I wrote a blog to myself. This 5th year anniversary was tough. I found the 5th year really, really tough.
I found 5 hard. Really hard.
There was just this milestone about 5. But I wrote a blog to myself on my birthday this year that was called You Will Be Okay. And it was what I wish someone, and how I prefaced it was, I said, I wish someone had said this to me on the day he went in, but I think if they had, I wouldn't have believed them, which is exactly the point you were making. And I wrote this blog to myself saying, you will be okay. Because if someone had said that to me, it was all I needed to hear, I think, at the start of this, was you're going to be okay. But I wouldn't have believed them, because that pain is so consuming. And, you know, I'm a host for the Widowed and Young new member Zooms. And so I am seeing new members in their rawest form when they join that charity. And I always want to be really measured, because it's where you want to give people hope, but they're not necessarily ready to hear it at that point. They're very careful, haven't you? And I have to be really careful. And I work with an amazing group of volunteers on this rota, and we try and be really measured, because you don't want to say, we've been there. Yes, we know it's shit and you're going to really struggle, but you're going to be all right. And you will get through this, because they're not ready to hear it. Some of them are, don't get me wrong, but some of them aren't. And so you have to be really careful. But I think that's it. And if I can show anyone and shed a light on, you will be okay. And, you know, I think it also sheds a light on as well is, and it sheds a light on children's grief as well. So I don't talk a lot about Rebecca, because I don't do a lot of blogs about Rebecca either, because I'm very conscious that that's her story. And if she wants to tell it one day, she can. And she's at an age now where every time I write a blog, I will ask her permission now if I'm going to talk about her. I ask permission if I use photos and things. Yeah. And so I do talk about it. And, you know, when you go back and you remember some of what she was like in those early stages. And, you know, I had one recently. I was on a new member Zoom, and the new member, their child had not been crying. And I was like, yeah, no, mine didn't. Mm-hmm. My child didn't cry. She didn't cry. And Rebecca questioned it with me. She said, I'm really sad, but why aren't I crying? And again, if people pick up this book and it just makes someone go, oh, okay, it's normal, I'm not alone, then hopefully that will help people as well. But, you know, but I come back to, we've done this because we've had that grief. And, you know, I'm no expert on grief, but
it's bittersweet, isn't it?
It's bittersweet. Yeah.
Yeah. But don't you think, and I am blowing both of our trumpets here, but there is something just so powerful about this terrible thing happening, and knowing in your soul that it could be done better, the way that you were treated better, the way the support that you were able to access could be better, that if
Yes.
people could be better informed, they could be better supported. And you could sit and just kind of moan about it and say, oh, I wish people understood me better. I'm angry. People don't get it. And actually, okay, well, instead what I'll do is I'll make something that educates them. And is there if people want to access it. I'm not going to ram it down people's throats. But, I was looking at the downloads for the podcast, and a large percentage of my listeners aren't widowed. And I'm really surprised by that, because I thought, well, why would they want to know? But yeah, and this is my favorite statistic to band around. But if you are in a romantic relationship, one of you's getting widowed, aren't they? The likelihood
100%.
of you dying in your sleep together in old age is minuscule. So the chances are that you are going to be widowed, or the person you love is. And if you don't know how to deal with this, and if you love them, you might want to help prepare them. And I'm not talking necessarily about people who are sick. I'm talking about, the kind of inevitability of death for us all at some point. And it's a bit morbid and a bit sad to think about it. But actually, if we make death part of our conversation, part of living, because we can't avoid it. Ideally, we'd like it to not happen as young as it did to our husbands. But, to understand that there are better ways of doing it, there are better ways of being supported. And, let's hope better ways to die in the future as well.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting in that it's inevitable. We are all going to grieve at some point. We are all going to be bereaved at some point. Now, whether that is
and it
a
won't be
parent,
but it will be your parents, siblings, friends, right?
Yeah, pets, friends, colleagues, it could be anyone. We are all going to go through this grieving process, yet we don't talk about it. And it's really taboo. And and that in itself, I don't understand. I just don't understand why we've got this British keep calm and carry on. And I think so again, if we can start to get conversations, and that's why this podcast is such a great idea, because I know that so many people listen in and it gives them something to think about. There's so many different experiences. The commonality is that we've all been widowed, but it can happen in so many different guises. And I don't know why we don't talk about it. So if by doing this book it gets people talking, by the podcast, but equally I've been very clear with friends and family and colleagues and people. I'm like, please don't feel obliged. I don't want you to feel obliged to buy this book, to read this book, because it's not an easy
feel
read.
Obliged. Feel obliged. And everybody got one for Christmas.
Yeah, I'm like, well, it's not the cheeriest thing for Christmas, is it? And my sister jokingly, I don't know if she's going to, but my sister jokingly was like, can I wear a t-shirt to the book launch that says, spoiler alert, he dies? And I was like, sure, that would be hilarious. There you go, we're back to levity again, right?
Friday,
yeah.
And next Friday. I'm
Friday.
coming along to this. I'm excited.
So it's things like that. I was thinking today, I was like, oh, should I have thought about an outfit for my book launch? I think is something else, is that I think when you've gone through this experience, and I think particularly in the way I was, where I had to just get on with it. I didn't have a choice. No, and I can't stress this, I was isolated, but more than that, I couldn't even order us a takeaway because everything was shut. So Charlie died on a Sunday afternoon, late Sunday afternoon. About an hour and a half later, I looked at Rebecca and I was like, right, I'll cook dinner then. Because somebody's got to, right? Somebody's got to. It's dinner time. She's a child. I need to feed her. And we didn't have a McDonald's, or I couldn't do anything. So I think I've had this mentality, and I think this is part of it. It's like, I've written this book, and being completely frank, writing this book as well as a lot of other stuff, but I ended up back in therapy last October, and it's why I wrote the book in 2024. I finished it over a year ago, and it's taken till now because part of it was because I realized there was a lot I hadn't processed and I'd put in a box because of that whole, I've just got to get on with my life. And so, it did put me back in therapy for 6 months, which again, you know, you sit there and I was like, oh, if someone had said I'd be going back into therapy 4.5 years in, I'd have been like, really? Jesus Christ, I'm still going to need therapy? It's the best thing I ever did going back
Oh,
in
mate,
last
I
year.
said to my therapist, I think we're 4 years together now. I think I probably
Yeah.
paid for at least one extension on her house. But
Yeah.
for me, it's kind of non-negotiable because
Mm.
especially at the moment where things are rocky, and I feel like always I need somewhere to go to talk after doing all the interviews and living in
Yeah.
this kind of grief world a lot, and very much like writing the book, because you kind of get immersed back into it. And
Yeah.
there's a reason why we don't stay in that grief forever, because you couldn't survive it.
You couldn't survive it. And, you know, and so I've been in this doing mode, and I was doing it, and then I've edited it, and then I got the copy editor's comments back. And so I I took on board her edits, and I did that, and then we did the proofread, and then I did it a final read. And I think it was only when I did the final read that it hit me. And I was talking to my friend, and I said, "Oh, I've done the final read." I was like, "It's really sad what happened to us." And my friend looked at me. She was like, "Yes, Emma, we know that." And I was like, "But I just don't think I've ever really thought about it in that way. I was too busy trying to just keep going, and then,
And protect
you know,
Rebecca.
I was going to protect Rebecca, and I was going to raise Rebecca, and I just had to keep going, and I was living the grief, and I knew that the grief was painful, but I don't think I really thought about it in a shit, what has happened to us kind of way. So I did this book, and I was like, it's really sad what happened to us. And she was like, yeah, we know that. I was like, but I don't think I've ever really, and reading it cold, I was like, oh my God, it's really sad. But then on the flip of that, I sat there and I was like, I'm actually, and this isn't in an egotistical, arrogant fashion, but I am actually in awe of me and my daughter, because I don't know how we did it. And again, when we think about people who are newly widowed, they are probably sitting there now going, we are never going to survive this. We cannot survive this. How the hell do I get up every day and keep going? And, you know, I've read this back, and it only the book only focuses on the first 15 months. Because if there's a natural stopping point in the book, and that's where I stopped it. But I looked and I was like, I'm actually in awe of us that we survived that first 15 months, because it was tough. It was incredibly tough. Yet we did it. We survived, and I'm in awe of us.
And it is quite nice to, you know, you drag yourself up that mountain, and it's hard, and you slip and you slide on the way up. And sometimes you have to get to the top of the mountain and look back and go, fuck, I did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had this kind of, I call it the poor me's, where I just looked, I can't remember what I'd done or why it came to me, but I started crying, and I was like, what's the matter? I said, just poor me. Like, that was awful. But it feels like such self-indulgence that you couldn't possibly indulge in when you were going through it. But now you can look back and go, poor me, poor us, poor me,
yeah.
you know, because every aspect of every ounce of my being was, you know, taken up with protecting my kids and trying not to grieve, you know, drinking, anything, so I didn't feel this. And it's now, you know, in sobriety, with the benefit of hindsight and therapy, but I can look back and go, poor me, that was really awful. That was, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
Yeah. And I think that's the point I'm at. You know, I was numb. And I can remember I was numb. I didn't feel. I was grieving, don't get me wrong, but I felt numb, completely numb. And then I can remember coming out of that, and then that was a new layer of tough, because then I was like, oh God, it was so much fucking easier when I was numb, because everything bounced off me when I was numb. Whereas now I'm feeling, and things hurt in a different way, and you know, and I think that's, you go through these different cycles with grief as well, don't you? You know, I lost I lost a close friend of mine at the end of last year, which is probably still in a box, and I don't think I'm quite ready to process that. It was very sudden and unexpected, and that's in a box, and one day I might let it come out of the box. But when that happened, I completely underestimated how triggered. And again, I was really, really triggered, and I took time out of work, and I can remember talking to people at work, and they were like, "Obviously, this is going to be triggering." What do you mean? Obviously, this is going to be triggering.
Mm. And isn't it
Again,
funny?
it's that
All the knowledge
naivety on
we
my
have,
point.
you think we'd know, right? We've been in this club long enough. You'd think we'd know what would trigger us. For me, I find airports triggering because the dads are helping, and I
Yeah.
don't like flying, and my kids notice it as well. My eldest said, the dad's lugging the suitcases off the what do you call it, the reclaim thing, and it doesn't. It's not the big anniversaries. It's not the death dates. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're shit, but it's the day-to-day stuff, isn't it? And I'm thinking of Emma. I gotta stop calling your daughter Emma. I'm thinking of Rebecca. And, as she gets older and, transitioning up to university or college or work or relationships, way down the line, potential children, we're not going to stop grieving just because the years have passed. Every milestone is going to hurt.
Yeah. And I think,
that's
no, but I think you're absolutely right in that, I can look back, and I had 21 years in my relationship with Charlie. We had achieved an awful lot in those 21 years. We'd survived, he'd beaten his cancer. We had got married. We'd had a baby. We'd done our holidays. We'd done this, that, and the other. I have an awful lot of memories and things that Charlie and I had achieved in our marriage. And I read something once that said children don't really properly start forming memories till they're 7. So I'm like, Rebecca's got 3 years of memories, right? That's how my brain equated that. She's got 3 years of memories. And that's incredibly hard for her. She once said to me, "Oh, when I'm 20, Dad will have been dead half my lifetime." Yeah, like when you're 20. And that's it. And so I've got a wealth of memories that I can look back on. And it, I guess this is another reason why having this book is so important for me, for her, is that it keeps her dad alive in a way. He comes to life through this book. I talk about, because I feel that to understand the ramifications around Charlie's death, you kind of need to know who Charlie was. So, the book starts talking about Charlie, and again, only from when I met him. I can't tell his story from before I met him because that's his story to tell. But it brings to life memories of her dad, and it helps to keep him alive. And as you say, we've got GCSEs next year, then she's looking at going to college and this and this and this. And all of them is without him. And that's going to be incredibly difficult for her. She's going to learn to drive, and she's got all of this ahead of her. And that's really painful. But as you say, like, Charlie is still an integral part of our lives. He's not been here for 5.5 years. There are still pictures of him up around the house. I can't see that ever changing. We'd always planned to go to the west coast of America for my 40th. We had the route planned. We knew what we were going to do. I turned 40 the year after he died. The world was shut down. And last year, so 2024, we did that trip. Rebecca and I did that trip. I've never driven abroad. I drove across America. So I went big, right? You go big or go home. I drove from San Francisco to LA. We did a trip.
Wow.
I'd never driven abroad. But, and I know people have very different views on, what happens after you die and whether there's an afterlife and what have you. But, I get comfort from random things. And when I picked up this car, the car hire, he gave me the keys, and he said, "Right, you need to go to level C." I was like, okay. He was like, "Yeah, level C for Charlie." To pick my car up. And I was like, okay, we're fine. And it sounds, to someone who's not gone through what we've gone through, you'd probably go, it's just a car park level. But for me, I was like, okay, we're going to be okay. I can do this drive because I'm picking the car up from that level. C for Charlie. That car could have been on any level, but we've got a little guardian angel looking after us. And we did drive across America. Although the best bit about that was we went up, it was hilarious. We go up to pick the car up, and Rebecca just looked at the car and she went, "What is that? That's weird." Because we were given a Dodge Challenger, a proper American muscle car, the longest car in the world, that when I'm sending pictures to male friends back home, and they're like, tell me you're driving that car, how that car deserves to be driven. I was like, nope, I am sticking to the speed limit.
I'm just 10 and 2, 10 and
gripping
2.
the steering wheel, maybe not even driving to the speed limit, because I'm really, really scared of this great big muscle car. But Charlie would have loved it. He'd have absolutely adored that car. And so it's things like that. So, you know, he's still part of our everyday life, you know, and we talk about him every day? No, but he's there. He's always part of our life. And I can't actually ever see that changing.
No, and I don't think it will. And I think having created this gorgeous, tangible testament of his legacy to the world, I just think it's lovely. You know, the thought that book could be, you know, passed through families, or, you know, people could pick it up in years to come in a little dusty bookshop. And I just think there's magic. There's magic in the written word, and there is magic in spoken word. It's this kind of sharing of stories. It's powerful. Emma, I've loved talking to you today. Maybe
it's been lovely being back.
A little check-in with each other. I am coming to your book launch next week. I'm very excited for it. So I'll try and get a little bit of content that we can share.
Yes, that would be fab.
We're going to wear our veils, aren't we, Emma? We'll talk about that later. And just for the listeners now, could you just do a little recap on where people can find you, where they can find your book and your blog?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called Is Daddy Going to Be Okay? By me, Emma Charlesworth. It is available on Amazon. It may be available from other retailers, but right as of now, the only place in the UK I can say it's available is on Amazon. Anyone who is listening in the States, it's available to order from Walmart and Barnes and Noble. And other retailers are going to come on, but they are the only 3 I know of at the moment.
It's early days, Emma. It's early days.
So, and then my blog is Life is a Roller Coaster. So lifeisarollercoaster.co.uk is the blog page that people can go to, and then all of my social media handles are linked from the main page on there.
Lovely. And I will put those in the show notes as well, so people can reach out and find you. I think your book is going to be a success. I think it's beautifully written. Before you go, just tell people who are listening about showing Charlie your Tigger, your bouncing Tigger.
My bouncing Tigger. So how I've written the book is I have every chapter is something that either I said or was said to me, because again, I feel that gives a nice point that if it's a bit much for people, they can put the book down, and, you know, it gives an indication. And that was my chat up line to my husband, was, would you like to see my bouncing Tigger? And so that is the name of the very first chapter of this book. And interestingly enough, my mum came around tonight. My mum's taken my daughter dancing for me, and that was the chapter title she picked up on when she picked up this book for the first time. She was like, would you like to see my bouncing Tigger? But that's what I've done. Amazing. It because I've wanted to make this relatable, and that is how I lured my husband with that offer.
Obviously quite the impressive bouncing Tigger, because you were together a long time, Emma.
We were then together for 21 years. I don't know what he was expecting with that, but he did actually get to see a real life Winnie the Pooh bouncing Tigger. So if he was expecting anything else, or he thought there was some rude connotation with the offer of a bouncing Tigger, he was sadly disappointed, because it was genuinely a bouncing Tigger for Winnie the Pooh, a bouncing Tigger. Yeah.
Amazing.
So that's how I've done the book, and that's the very first chapter.
That sounds like the beginning, and it was the beginning of a true love story. And
100%.
Like many true love stories, they don't always have the happiest of endings. And I am, as I've already said to you previously, I am very, very sorry that you're in the club. I'm very glad we got to meet in the club. You know, I wouldn't want to be in here with anybody else. And I wish you absolutely all the luck in the world with your book. I will plug it myself. I've been allowed an advance copy, people, but I will buy an actual copy, because it really matters when you've poured your heart and soul into something. It really matters when people buy it. And, you know, you don't even have to read it necessarily. You could, but just to support somebody who's trying to do something to make their life better and to make the world better. So buy Emma's book.
Thank you very much.
And for all of you listening out there, thank you very much for sticking with me. I hope you're doing all right. I will be back with you next time with a interview format, although we actually kind of interviewed anyway, but a more traditional episode. And thank you to all of you lot for listening out there. It means ever so much to know that we're not just speaking to dead air, doesn't it, Emma?
Absolutely.
We appreciate you. We appreciate you. And you look after yourselves and each other out there. And I'll be back with you next week with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you think someone else may benefit from this, please do share. We'd also really appreciate a quick review. It helps more people find the show. Thank you again, and see you next time on Widowed AF.